All right, good afternoon, everyone. We are so excited and thankful that all of you have traveled from across the country to come here today to celebrate Caribbean Heritage Month. We know it's a very special time, so yes, round of applause. My name is Heather Foster. I am an advisor here in the White House Office of Public Engagement. I'm also of Caribbean descent. My family is from Jamaica. Oh, a lot of Jamaicans here today. But I know we have other cultures here represented today. So we welcome everyone from our Haitian to, yeah. Anybody from Dominican Republic? Uh-oh. Trinidad? Guyana? All right, make the noise, make the noise. Am I missing anybody? Suriname? Bahamas? Barbados? St. Kitts? Dominica? Woo! Did we cover everybody? South Africa? All right. Motherland, everybody. So we welcome everybody here today. I see such great friends. We're going to get started. We have a packed afternoon here today, and we're going to hear from wonderful, wonderful speakers. I really want you all to just enjoy your time here today. I made some quick announcements. One, the most important is if you're wearing a pink badge, please make sure if you leave this room, you have a staffer that escorts you out to the hallway. So please remember that Secret Service is very, very tight about that. But I don't want to delay things. We have a great conversation here today, and you're going to be kicked off by Assistant to the President and the Director of the Domestic Policy Council, Cecilia Munoz, who is going to come and speak directly to you about some of the President's initial priority issues this year. Thank you, Cecilia.
Thank you very much, Heather. Good afternoon, everybody. So Heather didn't warn me that this was going to be such a raucous crowd. I was listening. We're very, very pleased to have you here at the White House, and I know you have a lot of good work to do today, but I just want to point out that really I'm just going to say it since I got this audience, some of the greatest people I get to work with happen to be Americans of Caribbean descent, and Heather Foster is one of them. So I'm very, very grateful for her partnership and leadership, and she is a tremendous advocate for all kinds of things all across this building. I lead something called the Domestic Policy Council, which means that I have the privilege of working with the President's cabinet on a whole range of domestic issues like education and energy and health, civil rights and immigration among them. And every single one of those areas touches on the lives of every community in this country. But I work for a president who believes incredibly strongly that if we're going to be successful, if we're going to achieve the very ambitious goals that he has set out for this country, like making sure we become first in the world again by 2020 in college attainment, like building on the progress that we've made in addressing the dropout rate in our high schools. We now have an 80% completion rate in high schools, which is the highest point in our history, but we have a lot more to go. Like making sure everybody has access to health care in this country, where we've made tremendous, tremendous strides. That affects every community in this country, and it affects your community as well. And like passing an immigration reform, which is something we've been fighting on for 6 long years, and we're going to keep fighting until we get it done. All of these things have resonance all across the whole country, but one of the things I've learned in my work in this administration is that as important as it is what government can do, and what government can do is tremendously important. It is also true that we need to have enough humility to know that we can't get it done all by ourselves. We need engagement, we need partnership, we need people's hands and their hearts and their hard work if we're going to accomplish the incredibly ambitious goals that this president has set out for this country. And that's where you come in. And that's why we're grateful that you took your time to be here with us this afternoon. That's why we have a panel of all kinds of distinguished folks here to exchange information, to make sure that we're generating ideas and sharing information, and that we're making good use of your time, but that especially that we walk out of here understanding the issues as you see them, as you experience them, as you feel them, because that will help us sharpen our work within the federal government. That is tremendously important to our success. So I will just say on the immigration issue, which is something that I've been working on my entire career, that this is the president's #1 legislative priority. I got to know him when I was at a civil rights organization called the National Council of La Raza, and he was in the United States Senate because we were working on a previous version of this bill that we're trying to get done. We've reached the point where we've won the argument, right? Even in the House of Representatives, we're not having a conversation about whether there should be an immigration reform. We're having a conversation about when they should do it. And the thing we were fighting against is the ones who are making the argument that, yeah, we should do it, just not now, just not this year, right? That's the conversation that's happening in the House of Representatives. And I want you to know that this president has no intention of giving up on this issue, that the best way to get this job done is for Congress to act. Any options that the president has at his disposal are by definition only temporary. We need to get this done permanently for people. We need to fix the system, and that requires an act of Congress. And we know we have the support of the country on the objectives that the president's trying to achieve with immigration reform, and we know we have the support in the Congress. The one thing we don't have is a pathway to a vote, and this president's going to keep pushing until we get there. And we need your help to make sure that that push is as strong as possible. So I want to close by asking you that. And I want to also make sure that I'm brief because the speaker who comes after me is much more eminent and much more interesting. So it is my great honor, actually, to introduce to all of you the Attorney General of the United States, Eric Holder.
How are you? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So we have lots of West Indians in the house, huh? It's Irie Man. Well, thank you, Cecilia, for those kind words, and thank you all for being here today. It's a pleasure for me to help welcome you to the White House this afternoon as we gather with a distinguished group of business people, civic partners, faith leaders, public servants, diplomats, and guests to mark National Caribbean American Heritage Month. It's always one of my favorite events because I know that we have lots of, I heard, the cheers and whatever for different islands. Didn't seem like we had a lot of Bajans here, though. That's just one? Well, that's all we need. That's all we need. That means the odds are equal then, one Bajan and the rest of you West Indians. I would particularly like to thank Cecilia's colleagues at the Domestic Policy Council, Heather Foster and her colleagues at the White House Office of Public Engagement. Heather's mom is here with us. Where is she's a proud Jamaican. Where is she? There she is. Yes, indeed. All right. And I'd like to thank each of our expert panelists for all that they've done to bring us together today. It's a privilege to take part in what is this important annual observance, and it's an honor also to join this group, which includes congressional leaders, distinguished representatives of Caribbean nations, and community advocates in reflecting upon our rich cultural heritage, discussing issues of importance to Caribbean American leaders at every level of government and the private sector, and celebrating the diversity that has always stood as one of our country's greatest strengths. Now, since 2006, when Congress officially designated June as Caribbean American Heritage Month, our nation has paused around this time each year to honor the contributions of generations of hardworking Caribbean Americans. And for me, and I know for many of you, this celebration has taken on a special and a personal significance. Now, as many of you know, my father and all four of my grandparents came to this country many years ago from the great island of Barbados. Peas and rice, ackee, sawfish, yeah, all that stuff. Like millions of others throughout our history from all walks of life and from every corner of the globe, they set their sights on America's shores and moved to New York City in order to build a brighter future for themselves as well as for their children. So although I'm a native New Yorker by birth as well as by upbringing, I'm proud to say I was raised in a Bajan home, infused with West Indies traditions and with West Indian values. Yeah. One of the greatest blessings of my life was growing up in a neighborhood that was populated largely by immigrants and an overwhelming number of West Indian immigrants, among people who held a deep appreciation for this country and its enduring promise, if not at that time its reality, of liberty, opportunity, and justice for all who live within its borders. These wonderful, hardworking women and men, and I mean these were hardworking folks, understood the importance of family. They championed education. They taught me the values of tolerance and of respect, and their visions and their hopes, if not for them, but for the next generation of a limitless future defined by fairness and equality for all, continues to inspire me to this very day. It challenges every American, and particularly the leaders here today, to carry on the work of those like my father and grandparents who crossed vast oceans and great cultural divides, who struggled and who sacrificed in order to keep the great American experiment in motion, who challenged our great nation to live up to its founding concepts. Now, most of all, it calls us to the service of the nation that we love and the pursuit of our highest ideals. In many ways, these ideals were the driving force that first sparked my interest in the law, and that was more years ago than I'd like to admit. They have guided every step of a career that I've spent serving and trying to perfect our justice system, and they have been reinforced by the experiences that have defined my life and work, including the problems I witnessed as a kid, growing up on the streets of East Elmhurst in Queens in New York City, the challenges that I've worked to confront since I first came to Washington more than 3.5 decades ago to begin my legal career at our nation's Justice Department, and the constant drumbeat of concern that I hear every day as the Attorney General of the United States in my travels across this great country. Concern for those who felt they have been left out and who have been left behind, for victims of crime, abuse, and violence, for the most vulnerable members of our society, including children, as well as the elderly, and for those, especially young people, who too frequently make wrong choices and come into contact with our criminal justice system. Over the last 5 years, I'm proud to say that my colleagues across the Justice Department and our counterparts throughout the government have helped to achieve what I think is really significant progress in addressing these and many other issues, and especially since last February when President Obama launched a national call to action known as My Brother's Keeper. We've been working closely with partner agencies, with private groups, citizens, foundations, corporations, and community leaders like so many of you to address persistent opportunity gaps and to provide young people with the support that they need to stay on the right path. Now, My Brother's Keeper is uniting Americans from all walks of life to knock down the barriers that too many of our young people, and particularly young men of color, continue to face. We are challenging citizens to get involved by taking a pledge at, there's a website now, whitehouse.gov/mybrotherskeeper, to serve as long-term mentors to young people in their communities. Again, that's whitehouse.gov/mybrotherskeeper. And we're striving to ensure that every American's ability to get ahead is determined by his or her own work ethic, goals, and potential, and not by the circumstances of their birth. And this, at its core, is the promise that we're striving to fulfill through My Brother's Keeper. It's the enduring truth that lies at the heart of the American dream. And it's the challenge that animates this administration's ongoing efforts to confront one of the most urgent challenges that you're discussing today, the need to pass common sense immigration reform, and to fix our broken system by creating an earned path to citizenship, by continuing to strengthen border security, and by holding employers accountable, and by bringing our immigration system into the 21st century. Now, it was that very system that worked at the beginning of the last century and made possible the dreams of my relatives and so many others from locations around the world. As you know, comprehensive reform is supported by the overwhelming majority of the American people. But this is about far more than politics. It's about who we are as a nation and what we stand for as a people. And it goes to the core of our identity and our proud history as a country comprised of, and let us never forget, a country built by immigrants. Now, let me be clear. Unless you trace your roots to Native American ancestors, you are of immigrant stock, no matter when your relatives first stepped upon our shores. Unless you're, as I said, Native American, you are an immigrant. Moving forward with these reforms, making these improvements, and ensuring that this country will always be able to welcome leaders, entrepreneurs, artists, innovators, and hard workers is nothing less than, I think, a moral imperative. It's also good policy. Throughout history, the United States has been constantly renewed and strengthened by immigrants who enrich our country with their ideas, their enthusiasm, and their talents. It has what has made America unique among nations, and especially today, as we move into an age of unprecedented global competition, the perspective, the energy, and the innovation of immigrants and descendants of immigrants, like so many of us, will be as important as ever before. Our nation will continue to rely on business, faith, and community leaders, both in and far beyond this room, to help realize this vision and to achieve the uniquely American dream that has always drawn the best and the brightest to our shores. We'll keep depending on you to address critical challenges like the ones you discussed here at the White House today. And we'll never stop fighting to support and stand alongside you as we work together to make this nation stronger, more secure, and more prosperous, and strive always to help build the brighter and more inclusive future that our children deserve. Now, as I look around this crowd, I can't help but feel optimistic about our ability to do just that. I know I speak for my colleagues at every level of the administration when I say we are proud to count you all as partners in this work and in this effort. We are grateful for your leadership and for your many contributions, and we are very eager to see where our joint efforts will take our great nation in the months and the years to come. So thank you all very much.
Well, wasn't that a wonderful way to get started? I hope you all really enjoyed the Attorney General. So I just want to tell you a little bit about today's briefing. You're going to have the opportunity to directly engage with White House officials and officials from across the agencies that do the work that really impact a lot of the Caribbean community and Caribbean American community here in the United States. One thing that I do just want to let everybody know, we will give an update on the score and what's happening with the game, because I know we had to close things off, so that will be coming. But also, please feel free to ask questions, to be engaged. We've gotten feedback from other sessions that we've had, and we realize more and more that people want to be able to answer questions. The second thing is, as a person that works in the Office of Public Engagement, we get calls and letters and emails constantly all day. How people want to be engaged in the initiatives, how people want to really share this information. So as someone who could attend this briefing here today, I'm going to ask you to do two things. One, after you leave, I want you to hold a conference call in your local community about what you heard here today. Talk about the issues, make sure you share it with people, give them the information. And two, I want you, if you have the opportunity, to write something about what happened here today. If you have your own blog, if you're able to get into your local community newspaper, if you're able to do some radio, make sure that you are sharing the information. We're going to talk a lot about the issues that are really impacting our country right now. Today, President Obama is traveling to Minnesota to talk about the economy. It is a major issue that we have worked on ever since we got into this White House in 2009. A very important issue, and there's some key things that he's drilling down on to really remind everyone how our economy is growing and how we anticipate it to grow in the next couple of years. You just heard from Cecilia Munoz, and you also heard from the Attorney General. They mentioned immigration reform. We are at a critical place in terms of immigration reform where we need every single person to raise their voice on this issue. And so right now I'm going to introduce you to two of my colleagues in the White House Office of Public Engagement. It is their job to communicate, to serve as spokesmen on two very key issues that the president is very passionate about. He has been talking about these issues in multiple State of the Unions. And so we really want to make sure you have the opportunity to hear from both of them today and to also ask your questions about how you can be involved and how your community can be involved. So at this time, I want to introduce Jorge Neri. And I also want to introduce our Bayesian, Carrie Twigg. They both serve as associate directors here in the White House Office of Public Engagement. I'm going to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves and also give you an overview of the portfolios that they manage, and then they will also take some questions. We have two Mike's available for questions, so that is one thing that I do want to be clear about. I'll be moderating this session, and you are asking questions, not comments. We want to be respectful of everyone's time and also the other speakers that are here from various agencies, so we want to make sure that we're able to stay on time. And so I will remind everyone again that we are looking forward to your questions. So take it away, Jorge.
Great. How's everyone doing? How many is this their first time here at the White House?
Wow.
How many people's Facebook status is, I'm at the White House right now?
Checked in.
So thank you, Heather. My name's Jorge Netti with the Office of Public Engagement. I work on immigration and Latino issues. And I work on immigration not just through the Latino lens. I work on immigration towards all immigrants and figuring out a way that we win and pass comprehensive immigration reform. It's a difficult time. We're continuing to work to push that to happen. It's been a year since we passed the Senate bill in the Senate, and the House still has not acted. We're continuing to push folks to make sure that their voices are being heard and that we're getting to some sort of long-term legislative solution. The president, there's a couple different buckets that I'll hit. One is just overall legislation, but then there is things that folks should be aware of, like DACA, re-implementation of DACA. Folks that have DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, should be, one, signing up for it if they don't have it. 500,000 people haven't signed up for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. A lot from Caribbean communities have not. The other is people that have signed up, right now they're in their renewal process, so they have to reapply. All those forms are online. It's important for folks to do that to make sure that they're still covered under that program. Immigration reform is something that's core to me. I've worked on it pretty much all my adult life. I grew up on the south side of Chicago in a Mexican immigrant community called Little Village. Little Village was surrounded by, I don't know how many of you guys are from the city and from a major city, and a city as segregated as Chicago. It breaks down by the line. So if I crossed the street one way, it was an African-American community. If I crossed the street another way, it was a different type of Latino community. And then if I crossed the street another way, it was another African-American community. And oftentimes, some of my work in the lens that I take it, all these communities suffered from the same things. Lack of access to healthcare, jobs, gangs. And instead of speaking with one voice, those communities often spoke through many. And it wasn't as effective. So one thing that I would recommend, and I know that oftentimes immigration is viewed as a Latino issue. It's viewed as this is a Mexican issue. It's not. There are many folks within your own communities that are affected by a broken system. And the only way that that'll be fixed is through a legislative solution. And I recommend that you continue to work with with other organizations that are continuing to push for immigration reform, whether they be Latino, whether they be AAPI, so that we can speak with one voice that's much louder. I'm going to stop there and just see if folks have questions, and then Carrie, do you want to go into yours after
Sure.
I take some?
Buenas tardes, ¿cómo está?
Bien, ¿cómo estás?
Ya tú sabes. What has there been a partnership between the White House with the Institute of Caribbean Studies in terms of like a policy of immigration reform with the president, or has there been any type of connection, and how can ICS be of a vehicle to drive down the agenda of the president when it comes to immigration reform?
Yeah. So to the specific partnership, there isn't a specific partnership, and I'm not sure what the policy dialogue has been, but One thing that we can do and one thing that we have been doing is a series of conversations with different stakeholders throughout the country and here in DC, where we'll engage and listen to some policy recommendations, but then also figure out how we can do things better here. So we'll be more than happy to make sure that's happening at a larger level.
Hi, my name is Rob Campbell. I'd like to find out what you think is the major obstacle for immigration reform today in terms of politics of the U.S.
So, gotta remember I have my official hat on.
Name names.
I think that it's a very tough issue that the House has still not taken up, and we've seen that they've been the major roadblock in getting this done. The Senate passed it, passed the bill. President has been out there. As many of you may know, the President asked Secretary Johnson to do a review of all the enforcement policies, including deportations, and he asked the Secretary to hold on that review to make sure that they gave the House enough space to be able to get something done. And, you know, we're doing all we can to make sure that we're trying to get this over the finish line and that the House has no excuses on why this hasn't. But if there's one thing that I can point at, it's in that direction.
Good afternoon. My name is Dottie Joseph, and I thank you for your efforts with the immigration reform. I have two questions for you. Number one, what have been the policy considerations with respect to different countries' treatment under the immigration policies? Like, for example, I come from Miami, so we see it very vividly with, for example, the wet foot, dry foot versus how other immigrant groups are treated. I'm of Haitian origin. So what, if anything, has the administration done to address some of those disparities, which, quite frankly, seem to be drawn pretty starkly on racial lines as opposed to political versus economic divides? So that's one question. And then the other question is, Ms. Munoz talked about it's not a question of passing immigration reform, it's just a question of when. What can we do in our communities to kind of build traction, to put some fire under certain people's feet to make when closer to now?
So for the first question, I know that when the President asked Secretary Johnson to review all his current policies, it put everything on the table. So as part of the review, we're continuing to look at every single thing. As I can't speak to the specific policy that you're talking about, the wet foot, dry foot.
Adjustment Act. The Cuban Adjustment Act.
Right. I can't speak to that specific because I don't have.
It's actually not just that one. It's country specific, and different Hispanic immigrant groups are treated differently than, for example, Haitian immigrants versus Jamaican immigrants versus et cetera.
Right.
So that's really where I'm going.
Right. And I know that the Senate bill addresses some of that. But again, the Senate bill was, so to be clear, and I know folks may feel a certain way about the Senate bill, but to be clear, it was a compromise bill that was made in the Senate. The President didn't write that bill. Had he had a chance to write it and had he passed his own legislation, things would have looked a lot differently. But it was a compromise bill within the Senate. So I know address some of that, but to those specific things, that's why I think immigration reform is that much more important. There are some things that we can do administratively. There's others that we can't because it is law. And we need to reform a system to make sure that we even the playing field a little bit. And to the other, I think unlikely allies is an important voice, validators, whether it's faith, business owners, reaching out to these people and letting them know that this is important to me also. This is important to me because of, I have members in my parish People may not realize that, how many people immigration actually affects. So the more of those unlikely allies that you can get out there speaking to the importance of this, and the more that you all continue to let your voices be heard is going to be I think what gets this over the finish line.
When you ask your question, can you please be sure to say your name and your organization, where you're from?
Good. Julian Dubois, consulate of St. Lucia in New York. My question is, we have quite a few Caribbean nationals who come to the U.S. and get opportunities for development. However, most of those who are successful, you try to coax them to remain in the U.S., but those who go outside the law, you send them back to us. My question is, do you consider, or have you considered at all, in the immigration reform, the impact of those folks who come back home, how they impact our national security, and the global instability it creates in a region which is reasonably stable now? As you send them back, I'm hoping that you could give consideration to capacity building for us in the region, that we could ensure the Caribbean remains a stable environment. And because crime can cause states to fail, and I would like to know that you have that in the debate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that, and I'll check.
Good afternoon. My name is Hazel Rogers. I'm from Florida, and of course, I'm a state representative. So, just wanted to put that on the record too. I recognize that we do have executive order as well as other legislation that has to go through both chambers. But I'm here on behalf of a group that wants us to ask the president if he could consider the exoneration of Marcus Messiah Garvey, as one of the things that he does before he leaves office. As it relates to the issue of legislation and immigration, we know that legislation can also impact immigrant movement through the visa quotas. Okay, can you speak specifically to this group that wants to be advocate on behalf of immigration reform as to what has been done that's reflective of the people that's in this room and the visa quotas that was passed or considered?
So, on the specific visa in the Senate bill, the way that it has it now, it's basically if you're in a STEM field, and I know a lot of folks from the Caribbean are into the medical fields, whether they be nurses or healthcare or home providers. It's pretty much stapling a green card to their documents and going. And I know that there's some other things in the Senate bill that aren't so favorable towards the Caribbean community, but again, speaking of that specific point, we didn't write the bill. It was a bill that was compromised. And if we would have had it, if we would have wrote it, we would have wrote it a little bit differently.
Next question.
Hi, my name is Justina Thomas. I'm a founder of the Empowering and Developing Women Worldwide organization. I'm originally from West Africa, Sierra Leone. My question is that what will the immigration is about young people who have made mistakes and they fall in the hand of the law, and the next thing you know, they're on the list of deportation. Those that have, most of them came here when they were like young, a little younger than 5 or lower than 10. And they grew up here, and they have, I would say they spend their whole lives here. They have their families here. And unfortunately, they made a mistake that they end up with the law and they're in line of deportation. What will the immigration reform, how will it help them? And what will the community, because I live in Baltimore, the African community there, they don't know how to go about it, what to do, who to write to. They want to speak, but they don't know how to express their voices.
So to the last point, I can't tell you exactly who to talk to. I'm sure there's an organization in the room that may be able to help point you to the folks that you need to talk to within the House of Representatives or within the Senate or within the government. Specifically to that point, I know that the Senate bill does carry something for minor offensives. You know, when we expanded, when we issued DACA, it gave an opportunity for those young people that have been in the country, that were brought maybe to the country when they were very young, have lived here, a chance to, you know, remain in the country and move them to the low priority. For folks that have committed a crime, it is a little bit different because we don't have, the way that the law is written now, they are part of, I mean, they are part of our priorities. So it is a very case-by-case specific thing, and we can't make shifts unless we have big overall reform. And I know that the Senate bill does have stuff for minor offenses.
For minor offenses.
Jorge, are you allowed to say which organizations can help? So we do have to run a very fine line when we have pending legislation. So, but the key is that making sure you understand that legislation, and there are several different ways. There are definitely large organizations, those included in the civil rights, the very common African-American organizations, they all understand the Senate bill, and even sometimes it may say, taking a call to them and saying, why don't you do a presentation in the community to break it down. But definitely, we do want more people to be engaged in that process. We have to be careful. We can't tell you specifically which, well, can we tell them which organization?
Yeah, we could tell them which
Yeah.
organization, we just can't tell them like, yeah.
We
can tell
can't
them which.
specify who for you to talk to
Okay.
that's a member of Congress.
Yeah, that's how I understand.
Okay.
But we also have fact sheets, and I'll make sure that I get all stuff over to Heather so that you guys could read up on the Senate bill. And again, it's the 1-year anniversary that the Senate passed, it's actually today, I think, had passed the bill, and 1 year that Congress has not acted on it.
So at this time, I want to shift over to hear from Carrie Twigg, who is also working on an important issue on the president's agenda this year. But before we hear from Carrie, we have a very, very special guest from Capitol Hill who will be speaking to you all. She has traveled down and she heard that you all coming today, and she really wanted to give remarks. And so at this time, we're going to hear from Congresswoman Barbara Lee.
Well, good to see everyone. God, well, welcome. And thank you for inviting me to be here. Thank you for that kind introduction. First of all, I'm so thankful to the White House, President Obama, for his acknowledgement and continued support of the Caribbean community, the Caribbean region, and Caribbean Americans. And I think it's so critical that we continue to recognize and celebrate the tremendous contributions of Caribbean Americans and the vital, I'd say the vital and integral part that the Caribbean American community and the Caribbean community have played in the United States in terms of our history here in this country. And so President Obama, I mean, to have this take place at the White House is just remarkable. It shows what a priority this community, you are, and what the region means to this administration. I'm a longtime supporter of the Caribbean, of course, a frequent visitor, both unofficial and non-official, to the region. My son actually went to school in Grenada, and for many, many years, I've worked on many issues relating to the Caribbean. And so, of course, it was when, is Claire here, Dr. Nelson, when the Institute and all started to talk about Caribbean American Heritage Month, I introduced the resolution in 2006. And I'm really proud that then President Bush and now President Obama have issued proclamations annually recognizing June as Caribbean American Heritage Month. And that is just so remarkable, but it's so remarkable. And we couldn't have done that without your active and continued support and pushing members of Congress, because we actually had to introduce this in Congress and get a vote and make sure that this happened. Throughout our history, we have been so fortunate to benefit from countless individuals of Caribbean descent who have contributed to the American government, politics, business, arts, education, culture, including, and I always remind and share this personal note about myself, who my personal mentor was, and that was my confidant, my mentor, the Honorable, our beloved Shirley Chisholm. Shirley Chisholm. You know, she was of Bajan and Guyanese descent, and she never forgot her roots in the Caribbean. She was the first African-American woman elected to Congress, and she was the first woman and the first African-American to run for president. She paved the way for our great president, Barack Obama. It is because of her encouragement, really, that I got involved in politics. She took me to task. I was a student at Mills College. I had never voted. And, well, I wasn't even registered to vote. I was raising 2 kids, president of the Black Student Union. I had a course in government where I was required to work in one of the presidential campaigns. And I told my professor, flunk me. I'm not going to work for Muskie, McGovern, Humphrey. I just didn't believe they could relate to the issues I cared about. And invited Congresswoman Chisholm to campus. Lo and behold, she said she was running for president. And so I went up, I talked to her, introduced myself as president of the Black Student Union, told her about this class, and she says, and she still, until she died, she called me little girl. She called me her little girl. She said, you have got to get involved in politics. You've got to register to vote. And she, at that moment, I was so much like so many young people, didn't believe the system would work. And so she, though, convinced me. I went back, told my professor, ended up organizing the Northern California Shirley Chisholm presidential campaign, and we got 10% of the vote in my area. So that was my entree into politics. So she is with me day and night, and I always think about Shirley during June. This month offers us an opportunity to send a message of goodwill, first of all, to the Caribbean American community, but also to the region. You know, oftentimes I'm on the Appropriations Committee, Subcommittee on Foreign Operations, and have been on the Foreign Affairs Committee for probably 8 or 9 years, and so a lot of my work has to do with funding, USAID, funding, trade, development, aid, all of the foreign policy issues as it relates to resource allocation. And I constantly fight to make sure that the Caribbean region has parity with regions throughout the country, and I think it's very important, for example, that we included the Caribbean as it relates to HIV and AIDS as a priority. And every step of the way, our sisters, Frederica Wilson, Yvette Clarke, Sheila Jackson Lee, all of our members of Caribbean descent, Congresswoman Donna Christensen, I want you to know they are phenomenal. And they make sure that all of us remember that the Caribbean and every policy and every foreign policy and every appropriations measure that we look at, that the Caribbean and Caribbean countries are a priority. And so I want to thank you because during June, you remind me and you remind everyone on the Hill that we cannot forget that the Caribbean is an important region to our country. The Caribbean American community is an extremely important community in our country. And as we work and fight for immigration reform, we must do it in a way that's inclusive and open to future generations of Caribbean Americans. And so that, again, is part of what we have to do during June, is to become even more vocal for comprehensive immigration reform, because that is really essential as we move forward in this country. And so I just have to thank you again for being here. I want to thank President Obama and the White House for hosting this very important meeting. And just know, this month, we celebrate. But we also know that we have a lot of work to do each and every day. So stay in touch with your members of Congress, look at what our legislative agenda is, support the president and his agenda, and make sure that the Caribbean region continues to be a priority, and that Caribbean Americans continue to be recognized and honored and saluted for the major contributions that you have and will continue to make. Thank you again, and it's good to see you.